All right, everyone. Councilor Morrison, thank you. All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order. I declare we have quorum, and I'll ask Deputy Mayor Armour to read the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Chair Stone. I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe under the terms of the Robertson-Huron Treaty Number 61 of 1850 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. We commit to acknowledge, learn, educate, create opportunity, honor sacred places, and take actions towards real truth and reconciliation in support of our commitment to walk in the path together in respect, peace, and harmony for future generations. Midwich.
Thanks very much. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? I see none. All right. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Special Planning Council meeting to consider an application to amend the Community Planning Permit Bylaw 2022-97 pursuant to Section 34 of the Planning Act. The procedure of the meeting will be as follows. A brief explanation of the purpose and effect of the application and any correspondence received to date will be given by staff. The applicant or the representative will be asked to provide any additional comments without repeating the information already outlined by staff. Council will then have the opportunity to question the applicant, the planner, or anyone giving presentation. Once the staff and the applicant comments are concluded, the proposed amendments will be considered by Council. It is important to note that should Council approve any bylaw amendment applications this afternoon, the applicant, the municipality, and certain specified persons and public bodies, as defined by the Planning Act, may appeal the decision. During the 20-day appeal period, which commences on the date on which the notice of Council's decision is provided, no building permits may be issued or other work commenced. If you wish to be notified of the passage of a bylaw, any appeals or possible Ontario Land Tribunal hearings, you must file either with the recording secretary or with the clerk a written request for notification prior to the passage of the proposed bylaw. Notice was provided in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and applicable sections of the Huntsville Official Plan, and a public meeting was on March 12th, 2025. And with that, Manager Richard Clark is going to speak to our one and only application. Whenever you're ready, Richard.
Thank you. So through you, Mr. Chair, the subject property for these applications are 13 Madeline Street and 0 Shea Road. So as you'll recall, and as you just noted, Planning Council last considered these applications at a public meeting on March 12th, 2025. There was no recommendation on the applications offered by staff at that time, as it was considered premature to provide one given outstanding matters. Members of the public attended this meeting and provided written and oral comments for Council's consideration. The application is now back for Council consideration, and today's report describes additional work completed and modifications proposed to address outstanding matters and comments. The applicant's responses to comments received by agencies, council, and the public are appended to the report, and staff were generally happy with these responses. However, not all matters were appropriately addressed. As you're aware, the lands are designated urban residential and are within the Huntsville urban area in our official plan. The lands are also contained within the Urban Residential Low, Urban Residential 2, Open Space, and Conservation Precincts under the Community Planning Permit Bylaw. They also contain Natural Constraints 1 and 2 overlays, and additionally the lands contain previous site-specific zoning exceptions R1H 1822, R1H 1823, C 1821, and C 1822. These precincts and previous zoning categories, as you heard previously, were all added to the lands to support the Eagle Ridge subdivision, which was draft approved in November 2008 and amended through a minor amendment in June 2017. The previous approvals were all for a residential subdivision consisting of 118 single dwelling lots, a multiple residential dwelling block, and 2 stormwater management facility blocks. The applicant continues to propose to amend the development configuration in the Eagle Ridge subdivision to accommodate a higher density built form in block plan configuration, creating 6 new high-density residential development blocks containing a mix of multiple residential apartment buildings, street townhouses, and block townhouses, having a total of 600 residential dwelling units overall. The proposed bylaw amendment would change the precincts in the community planning permit bylaw to permit the proposed new form of development. And there were actually 2 planning applications submitted to facilitate this new development. One was a draft plan of subdivision amendment application submitted to the district, and one was a community planning permit bylaw amendment application submitted to the town. So there are recommendations from staff respecting both applications. The draft plan of subdivision amendment application was submitted to the district to request amendments to the draft approved Eagle Ridge subdivision. And the proposed amended draft plan is on the screens in front of you. This plan has been revised slightly since you last saw it. The revised plan contains or continues to remove the Fairburn block from the plan and changes the layout for the remainder of the site to a plan consisting of 6, as I noted earlier, 6 high-density residential development blocks, 3 open space blocks containing parks, open space, and a stormwater management facility. And those are blocks 7, 8, and 11 on the plan, and 2 conservation blocks containing natural heritage and natural hazard features and areas, and those are blocks 9 and 10 on the plan. So some of the changes include a resized block 11, and you can see it on your screens in yellow. Basically, they just added a tail to the end of it, and that tail was to accommodate the pipes leading from that stormwater management facility downhill, which would ultimately contain infrastructure and need to be maintained by the town. So we asked for it to be included in the town block. There's also a revised phasing proposal, which essentially included more of the proposed development to occur in phase 1. And now as part of phase 1, you see the park block being designed and constructed. Paisley Avenue will be extended all the way to Shea Road to provide year-round secondary access to the lands. And also, just to note, the swim block and open space and conservation blocks would be conveyed to the town prior to final approval of this phase. Phase 2 of the development would then include the final construction of the remaining lots, as well as the Paisley Avenue and installation of all associated underground infrastructure. And as I say, the development of blocks 4 and 5. The plan was also revised to include Paisley Avenue being a 20-meter right-of-way, and there was some confusion on the previous draft plan where it was shown as a 26, so that's been clarified. These changes are acceptable to the town, but several conditions of approval have been recommended to ensure the development occurs in an appropriate manner. So before proceeding, I just want to make a comment about the conditions staff are recommending and also the site-specific bylaw provisions. The applicant is bringing forward a proposal that many will be excited about for a lot of reasons. And chief amongst these are that the concept plan and demonstration plan that's been presented ticks a lot of the boxes. So this is a housing project right beside the Fairburn long-term care home. We know that we need housing to accommodate employees of that facility and employees throughout the town. It's a good location for this type of development. However, this is a large parcel of land, and this application is to change approvals from a low-density development with 118 lots nestled carefully within a so-called Eagle Ridge to a high-density development for up to 600 multiple residential dwelling units in buildings that could, and in all likelihood will, straddle over that ridge. As staff has noted before, this development is on a prominent height of land and could, if not carefully designed, impact a large extent of the Huntsville downtown skyline. In fact, it could be visible from several of the sensitive view sheds that have been identified by members of the public in response to the heightened density significant view shed survey. From Lions Lookout, for example, it has the potential to significantly alter nearly a kilometer of treed ridgeline in that sensitive view between Center Street and Highway 60. This development will also lead to the eventual ownership and operational and maintenance requirements of nearly 800 meters of new roads, new parks and open space, and stormwater management facilities and conveyance systems. Given the scale of this development, not surprisingly, there were concerns identified throughout the review. Issues relating to the following matters were identified as matters requiring further attention: trail and park design and construction timing, landform conservation and tree retention, stormwater management and drainage, traffic and pedestrian movement, blasting and construction impacts, and general design and development controls. So think of the conditions and site-specific provisions staff are recommending in this instance as being the belts and suspenders that we're saying are needed to make sure this development happens in a responsible way, in a way that's sensitive to the unique characteristics of the site, and in a way that's fiscally responsible for the municipality with respect to the infrastructure and lands that will be built and assumed by us in relation to this development. This would be considered a large development anywhere in Muskoka and north of Barrie, even in some parts south of Barrie. The applicant has done a lot of good work to ensure this development will be appropriate to the unique characteristics of the site and appropriate for the town. A great vision has been presented, but the developer will not be the one developing each development block, and this development will take time to complete. The staff and council around this table today may not be the ones around the table when some of the development blocks get built on. The belts and suspenders we're recommending are to help ensure that the applicant's visions become a reality and will result in a development that's considered appropriate to our town. So with all that being said, the bylaw amendment application before council was also modified to address matters and to put in place belts and suspenders. I won't read all of that. Instead, I'll show you a comparison between the old bylaw schedule and the new bylaw schedule. So the original bylaw schedule is shown on the left, and the new bylaw schedule is shown on the right. And at staff's request, things essentially got more detailed in the bylaw. Instead of just one urban residential high-density special exception precinct proposed, which can be seen on the left in gray, the proposal is now for 3. So as you can see on the right, there's one UR3 precinct for the residential development blocks on the north side of Paisley Avenue, a second for blocks 1, 3, and 4 on the south side of Paisley Avenue, and a third for the block to contain the new publicly accessible trails on block 2. Also changed are the site-specific provisions in the exceptions themselves. One exception is proposed to apply to all blocks, and that's exception A. And exception B is to apply to the blocks south of Paisley only, where building height and steep slope were identified as issues. Exception C is to apply to the Block 2 only. And as before, the application continues to propose deletion of previous site-specific zoning exceptions along with all previous holding provisions. So I have slides listing all of the specific provisions in each special exception, but I won't go through each in detail. I'll just skim through and describe some of the intent behind the new additions. And if council has any questions, we can go back to these slides. So in exception A, the main additions were, and I just got to put my glasses on for this. A relatively minor one, just to deem the front lot line on all of the lots to be along this new subdivision road. A 5-meter wide tree buffer to be maintained in a natural state along exterior side yards. Everything else was as previously proposed. We also added some site-specific provisions to trigger the requirement for a community planning permit on each of these lots. And remember, exception A applies to all the lots. And in that community planning permit process, we listed some of the detailed plans that would need to be provided to our satisfaction in order to get that permit. So again, we thought all of these were important based on this idea that belts and suspenders are needed to make sure that the vision that's being considered actually gets implemented. Exception B, remember these are the lots that are on the south side of Paisley Avenue, the new subdivision road. So these are the lots where the slope slopes away from the road, so it's a downhill gradient. And in some places it's quite a dramatic slope. In some places it's more gentle. But the way our current height definition works is height is measured from the road. So we have examples of developments in Huntsville where if you proceed with that definition, it means that on the down gradient side of the building can actually appear a lot more substantial than just the 11 meters on the roadside. So we have this definition because this property on the south side of the road is quite unique. We also have a provision that we're adding to require basically a slope stability assessment and a visual impact assessment to be submitted to our satisfaction if the developer of those blocks decides to do major grade alterations or to remove substantial trees that could be buffering those buildings. And then the last exception is just for that block 2 where there's going to be a public trail, but it'll be on private land. So we're just asking for a trail connection plan to be submitted, and then we're asking for details about access to be addressed to our satisfaction through an agreement. I also have slides of all the recommended conditions of approval that we're recommending, again, as belts and suspenders. I'll skim through these to describe some of the intent behind the non-typical ones. A lot of these recommended conditions you'll see in all of our comments on district subdivision applications, so those are non-surprising. The one on this slide, just to point out, is with respect to the roads that are being constructed, we do include in our 4th recommended condition there that the roads be an urban cross-section. One of the things we noticed when we were looking at the detailed engineering plans is what was being proposed was a semi-urban cross-section. The difference being that on a semi-urban cross-section, much like, I guess, Earls Road or Golf Course Road, There's the road and then a ditch and then a sidewalk. And for new development, considering council's strategic plan and their requirements to create complete streets, we're recommending that an urban section be used, which would include the road, a curb, a boulevard with trees, and then a sidewalk. So we're including special language in that fourth recommendation to make sure it's urban. And there's all sorts of good reasons for that. And we have the operations department here today if you have any questions about those good reasons. But essentially it boils down to it may be cheaper to build a road without a curb and boulevard, but for the town over the long term, there is more maintenance required for those ditches. So it's more of an impact on us over the long term. So on this slide, we have a requirement to have Shea Road assessed in consultation with ourselves, the town, to determine whether it needs any improvements to provide that secondary year-round access. As you remember, it was closed for the winter 2024-2025 season because there was concerns about whether it can be maintained, and it was determined that it couldn't, so it was closed. In this instance, what we've agreed upon is we just need secondary year-round access to the lands over that portion of Shea Road between the Paisley Avenue and Shea Road intersection and that Shea Road extension. So we're not worried about the rest of Shea Road south of that, but we do need it to be looked at. We need to make sure that it meets building code requirements and that it's suitable for that year-round secondary access. On this slide, there's also recommended condition 8. We did provide comments about the traffic impact study and the fact that it didn't consider movements at 2 intersections in the area. And we did get a response to that, but the response was based on some assumptions. So we're just including a condition that prior to phase 2 of the development going forward, some of those assumptions get looked at again through an updated traffic impact study. This one is just about making sure that provincial and federal requirements related to endangered species are addressed to the extent that that's possible. There are a lot of changes happening at the provincial level with respect to that. So there is some language included in this condition to just say that the applicant has to endeavor to get written confirmation from the provincial ministry with responsibility. It may not be possible for them to get that, so there's some flexibility in this one. These are standard. These are just about making sure that the detailed plans that were submitted do get implemented. And the recommended condition 11 is just about making sure that agreements are entered into. A subdivision agreement is entered into between our town and the developer to make sure that all of those recommendations and actions in those detailed plans do get implemented through the development of these lands. So that is the recommended conditions. I did include some of the photos that you previously saw, just to show you again some of the unique site characteristics, which include the steep slopes and some of the wetlands. And as council is aware, these applications were circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, and public and council comments provided on the at the March 12th public meeting were addressed by the applicant in their comprehensive response table, which is appended to my report. So providing the outstanding matters and the belts and suspenders that we're recommending are in place to ensure that the applicant's intended vision is realized, staff notes that the proposed development would appear to conform to the intent of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial planning statement. As such, staff are recommending approval of the community planning permit bylaw amendment application and conditional approval of the draft plan of subdivision amendment application, subject to the recommended conditions in the attachment to my report. So thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. And I'd also note that we do have operations staff here if you have any questions for them.
Thanks very much. We'll call on the applicant or the representative to make any comments.
Good afternoon. Just submitted a short presentation just to kind of highlight a few of our comments. I'll avoid duplicating the great work that Richard's already covered in terms of the details, but we can just hop right into this. Thank you all. We want to personally thank council and staff for scheduling a special meeting to deal with this application. Timing is extremely important for a number of reasons, particularly to get the road built further to service the Fairburn long-term care home, and so that these blocks can become developed to deliver new housing to support the long-term care home and to support the town as a whole. So appreciate town council scheduling this meeting, as well as town staff working with us to finalize the details of the bylaw and the draft plan of subdivision conditions. So in terms of our presentation, I'll just spend very briefly a few minutes addressing the commentary that we heard from council at the public meeting. And the commentary was mostly, I would say, overwhelmingly positive in terms of the development as a whole. Some questions about the timing and phasing of the park and the trails. And so as Richard mentioned, now the park is proposed as part of phase 1. We've worked with the town to include that special provision in the C zone that would require the trail study to ensure that there is a trail through block 2 and an easement for the town. So we've really worked to kind of refine those belts and suspenders. And if I think fair to say come to agreement on 95% of them, I'm going to call it, and there's just a few we want to seek some direction from council on. In terms of the phasing plan, Richard already covered in detail how we've adjusted the plan, and that was largely to deal with the matter of the secondary access. So building the entire roadway along Paisley Avenue out to Shea Road, and then there's just some phasing of the servicing in order to ensure that the upfront cost to do that is managed and that the development can move forward in phases. So in terms of these implementation details, these belt and suspenders, I mentioned we've come to agreement on about 95%. I think there were 3 or 4 versions of the bylaw and the conditions going back and forth between Richard and I, and most of the comments were addressed. There are just 3 final ones that we'd like to seek direction from council on, because we have just a difference of opinion on some of these final implementation details with town staff. The first is related to the road cross section. So as Richard mentioned, we've been proposing for some time now a semi-urban cross section that includes ditches instead of curbs and underground storm sewers. That's really the big difference between them. Consistent with a lot of other development that's happened in the area of late. It maintains the same, if not even a wider paved width than the urban cross section. And so in our view, can accommodate multiple modes of transportation and deal with the complete street objective that is understandably a goal of the town and a goal of ours as well. Can include a multi-use path along the road or a sidewalk, kind of at the preference of town council and town staff. There are also some, in our view, environmental and stormwater management benefits. It provides some additional quality control, improves water balance in terms of potential infiltration or evapotranspiration. In our view, also reduced infrastructure costs because it's all above ground. It's the naturalized ditch rather than underground sewers that would have to lead to a larger treatment facility at the end of the pipe because you're not getting the quality control of the ditch. Our firm actually does a lot of urban design guidelines, road cross sections, things like that for urban, suburban, rural municipalities. And more, a lot of municipalities are moving back to ditches or rain gardens or bioswales, kind of different ways of saying the same thing, which is let's send the stormwater to a soft area where we can have some extra quality control as well as those potential water balance benefits that I mentioned. So in this case, the storm water, we're only looking to control the stormwater from the road. The blocks are all required to provide their own on-site quality and quantity control. So we're just looking to send the stormwater from the road right into those ditches and then on the way to the pond and accrue those benefits that I mentioned on the way there. I've included some drawings of the cross section. I apologize, it might be a bit hard to see, but both the semi-urban on the left and urban sections on the right have the 8.5 meter wide paved area. In addition to that, there's also an added paved shoulder for the semi-urban cross section. The laser pointer function, yeah. Oh, the zoom, perfect. Yes, I forgot about that from the last time I was here. So 8.5 meter paved area, also paved shoulder on either side. This is actually the section that was used for the new Shea Road to the north. And what was done there is there is a rumble strip that divides the vehicular portion from a 1.5 meter wide asphalt paved pedestrian or cyclist facility. What we've heard from the town and other municipalities is that the asphalt paved facility has some benefits. Obviously, you don't have not the cracks, but the kind of the stress cuts in between the sidewalk panels, so it's a smoother ride. It's also part of the overall roadway construction, so you have the many feet of granular underneath, so it's a stronger build than the sidewalk that just perhaps has a few inches underneath. And as I mentioned, the sidewalk could be accommodated in lieu of this, but in our view, there are some significant benefits to having that facility versus the sidewalk. So the same paved width in both, the ability to accommodate the multi-use path or the sidewalk. So when I hear complete streets, I think multimodal access, cars, pedestrians, cyclists, and I don't think there's really a difference between one and the other, or perhaps there's an improvement with the semi-urban section in addition to the stormwater benefits that I mentioned. So we obviously have a difference of opinion on this one, and we're looking for some direction from town council in this regard. And our the request is simply that in that draft plan of subdivision approval condition, that the reference to using an urban section be removed. So all of the language in there with regards to complete streets, street tree protection where feasible, design and construction with town standards, et cetera, would all remain. It was just that one section of that condition that we're respectfully requesting council direct staff to remove. And I should say we also have our civil engineer in attendance, Tim from Pinestone Engineering, if there are any other questions from town council with regards to the design of this road or the stormwater management or anything like that. The second matter is related to Old Shea Road. Obviously, we've put some work into coming up with this alternative secondary access approach. Our traffic engineer is of the opinion that the usage of Shea Road will be very minimal because it doesn't really provide a more direct or convenient route really anywhere for someone living in the subdivision. So the expectation is that 80% plus of the traffic will proceed via Center Street, and the traffic study modeled that and found there were no issues with the intersection or anything like that. Notwithstanding that, obviously understand that there is an important need to provide secondary access, particularly from an emergency perspective, and so that's why the road's being extended all the way through now. This kind of second point of clarification we're looking for is related to the section of Old Shea Road that would lead from Paisley Avenue up to New Shea Road. That's the section of the road that's actually in quite good shape in our review, or in our opinion. It's fairly wide. It's a roughly 7-meter wide paved apron, plus there's an additional gravel shoulder, albeit you have some grass and stuff that's grown in the gravel shoulder, but it's still quite sturdy and quite strong there. We believe that it's more than sufficient to provide that suitable second access, and are just concerned that the condition 5, which I'll get to in a second, could be interpreted multiple different ways and could result in some perceived requirement to do significant upgrades to the road, whereas we feel none are required in order to provide that secondary access. Here's a photo of Claude's rather large SUV pulled over to the side of the road onto that gravel shoulder, really just probably a meter and a bit onto the actual paved area, and very substantial space left around the car for emergency vehicles to pass or for two-way traffic. So in our view, this existing condition is more than sufficient to provide that secondary access. So again, our request to council in this case is to direct staff to remove draft plan of subdivision approval condition number 5, which would require potentially improvements to that section of Shea Road. And then the final matter of clarification, if you want to call it that, is related to the BBBB zone. So as Richard noted, that applies to the 4 development blocks located along the south side of Paisley Avenue. And so that zone includes, it's 2 special provisions that are over and above those that would apply to the zones to the north. And they require, as Richard mentioned, a steep slope assessment and a visual impact assessment if anyone proposes significant grading changes to the block. And really the point there is, if you're bringing in a bunch of fill, if it was cost effective to do so, which I doubt would be the case, but if someone wanted to bring in a bunch of fill and raise everything up such that the buildings could perhaps start to have an impact from a visual perspective, they want to make sure that that's not the case, hence the need for the visual impact assessment. Also want to make sure that from a slope perspective, everything works fine. So there's already that being built into the bylaw. We're also looking to maintain the current 11-meter height limit in the bylaw, which is really barely enough for kind of a 3.5 story stacked townhouse product, which we think is going to be a very prominent use and built form in this development. It's very cost effective, relatively, there's very good medium, higher density use. And it's really important that you have that sufficient height allowance to incorporate the unique design requirements of that in terms of perhaps the partial lower level and the 3 levels above that. We've also included a new requirement in the bylaw for additional landscaping. Along Center Street, there's a requirement for a 5-meter soft landscape buffer, as well as 30% as a minimum on any of the blocks, a larger environmental protection zone, and obviously also the 15-meter buffer along the entire southern boundary of the site. So our concern with the proposed new height definition for this zone is it's kind of a nuance in terms of how height's measured. Right now, what the bylaw says is that you measure from the finished grade along the side of the building that's facing the front or the exterior side yard, whichever is less. And that obviously acknowledges that typically that's where you're going to have your front door. That's where you're going to measure your building height up from. The proposed revision would measure from the average grade around the entire building. And we're not necessarily talking about a significant change in what that calculation is here. As shown in this sample cross section, which actually relates to block 1, which is right across from the Fairburn site. In this instance, you have what we were showing what would be an 11-meter height measured from the front of the building. But at the back, because you have this transitioning grade moving down, and because we have this stated objective and requirement to maintain existing grade wherever possible, there's going to be slightly bigger height at the rear of the building. And so when you take the overall average measurement into account, you're going to measure it from a spot that's perhaps a meter or meter and a half lower than where it is at the front of the building. So you're going to result in a requirement where you can maybe get a height of 9.5 meters at the front versus 11 meters at the front, which just isn't enough to accommodate the 3-story, 3.5-story built form that we think is extremely important here. And below is kind of an inspirational image of that type of stacked townhouse form. What we've tried to do from the beginning here is come up with a flexible approach to planning that is attractive to medium density builders, because often it is hard to find zoning and site conditions that allow this to be feasible. And the concern is that if we're imposing this additional requirement that's a deviation from the town standard bylaw, that it makes it unattractive. It potentially provides additional hoops for a developer to jump through just to do this very modest stacked townhouse proposal. In terms of the overall visual impact, we essentially have a kind of a top elevation of the Fairburn home that's based on grading plans and the building heights of about 341 meters. For the 2 stacked townhouse building products I was talking about that max out the 11-meter height, we're at maybe a most of 331 meters at the top end, so 10 meters lower than that Fairburn long-term care home. We've taken some photos of this site from Center Street and other areas around the town where you can perhaps barely notice the top of the Fairburn long-term care home. And again, our expectation is that the townhouse blocks would be a good 10 meters below that. So very substantial buffering to remain there. If anything, it's Fairburn that would have any visual impact on the surrounding area. These buildings would be well below that top end elevation. So our request to council in terms of the bylaw is to remove regulation number 1 from the proposed BBBB zone and to just stick with the bylaw current definition that applies everywhere in the town, which is you measure the height at the front side of the building. Huntsville has a lot of sites that have slopes, it's very mountainous terrain. This definition has been established to apply generally everywhere. In our view, it makes sense to do so here as well. There are still plenty of belts and suspenders in place to make sure that any visual impacts are mitigated, gradings maintained to its natural condition, or you have to provide additional studies at the community planning permit stage to evaluate those. So in our view, there are significant and enough belts and suspenders in place to make sure that the vision and the goals and objectives of this proposal and of the town are met. And we're just trying to avoid an over-regulation situation here where it results in a condition that is not favorable to medium density development or could give pause to a potential developer because there's an additional requirement that they have to deal with. So all of the other provisions of the bylaw, conditions of the draft plan of subdivision, we're in agreement with. We're looking forward to working within and to clearing. It's really just those 3 matters that we'd respectfully request some direction from town staff or town council on. And I would be happy to answer any questions you have. And as I mentioned, our civil engineering consultants also in attendance if there are any questions of a more technical nature that I am not suited to answer.
That's great. Thanks very much. A lot of information there. Council members, comments or questions? Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and through you. 2 great presentations, a lot more information than I had in my wheelhouse. So a few things. First, I love that our town staff is putting belts and suspenders because this is going to have a significant impact in our town without a doubt. I love that you guys have agreed on 95%. You're never going to agree on 100%. It doesn't happen. But I do tend to agree with a couple of the reliefs that you do want. I wonder, like with the height thing especially, I look at the current bylaw in place. And I think if a developer is going to buy some land in this town, I think they need to be able to rely on current bylaws if they're going to make investments in housing. And that's going to allow us to have stacked homes, which I know Mayor Alcock, myself, and others have been really begging for. And if you can't get that lower level in a stacked townhouse, you really can't make that building affordable in any stretch. So that extra floor is going to have an impact on how affordable these units will be. So I'm 100% on board with keeping the bylaw as it is on that one. And as far as the sightlines, I agree. You don't want to be up on Lions Lookout and look down and see more, but you're already looking down at a bunch of buildings. You're looking at Freshco and you're looking at Burger King and everything else and Fairburn. So I don't think it'll have a vastly negative impact on that. Looking at as well the storm sewer plan and of course the sidewalk versus multimodal transportation. I kind of like that plan because if we do put less pipes in the ground, it's less pipes that we have to own and maintain. And we see all over Calgary, other places where some pipes have had some issues and it costs a fortune to fix. And if you're telling me I have to trust your educated opinion, because I'm not educated on this, but if you're telling me that that's a more natural, environmentally friendly way to move water around and that you have less infrastructure needed at the bottom, then I think that makes sense. And I do like the idea of a paved transportation network because I did have a meeting with somebody who's in a wheelchair, and she told me she wants more paved access because she said, imagine being in a motorized wheelchair and you really have to pee. That was her words. And she says just cha-chunk, cha-chunk, cha-chunk all the time. So she would rather see no sidewalks like that in the town anywhere. It was her take. So I think when you look at meeting environmental standards, accessibility standards, and everything else, but still making sure that town staff is satisfied with what's going to be built, I think that might be the better way to go overall, unless I hear an argument of why it would make no sense whatsoever. And the other thing on the development side and what the province wants, we talked about it this morning, like what they're pushing for density and restrictions and more burdens on developers. I think if we do something like that, we're just setting ourselves up for an OLT hearing, right? And we don't want that either for future development. And I think I might have a couple other things, but I'll come back and let someone else speak.
Go to Mayor Alcock first.
Thank you, Chair Stone. I echo Councillor Morrison's comments about appreciate all of the work both presentations, a lot of information, and I agree 95% is a pretty good place to be. But drilling down on the three questions, I'm a huge believer in complete streets. And so when I first heard that there was some discrepancy around that definition, what it should look like, I was a bit concerned. After your presentation, I really appreciate the fact that you're also a big believer in complete streets. And, you know, it is multimodal, all of those things. So you know, basically on that one, I'm probably going to go two questions quickly. One, you made reference to the fact that other municipalities are reverting back to ditches. And I think I know the reason why, but I'd like your explanation as to why they are doing that.
Certainly. I think primarily it is a stormwater management and an environmental consideration. Certainly in more urban municipalities, you have a lot of concern with sewer capacity,
Right.
with water balance requirements, et cetera. So whereas kind of the plan in the past was to, I think, maybe over-engineer and put these big sewers in the ground, there was always a hiccup at some point. And so there's a real kind of push to go back towards using these landscaped areas and for their benefit in terms of additional quality control, evapotranspiration, infiltration, et cetera. So in a lot of municipalities, even if it's not a ditch the whole way, in some urban municipalities, it's directing it to a rain garden where it can absorb some of the water, provide some treatment before it goes where it needs to go. And I mean, the benefit here is tangible. The difference is a smaller quality control facility at the end of the pipe for the ditches versus the storm sewer. So we definitely see some tangible benefits. And I mean, frankly, I mean, I appreciate the aesthetics as well of a ditch system that is well designed to include appropriate ground cover that can enhance that stormwater quality control. I mean, this is a site where we've really gone through detail with staff to make sure there are belts and suspenders to make sure that a ton of existing trees are going to be retained and new trees planted. So to have this facility along the road, I think it really blends in well with the overall approach here, which is higher density, yes, but maintaining that natural setting, which has been a big focus.
If I may follow, so that was exactly the answer I sort of thought you might say, and I'm really appreciative of that. I know there is a move to natural swales and as you said, ponds and things like that. So I really like that answer. And from an environmental perspective, I think it makes sense. And certainly when you talk about capacity in our sewer systems, we know we already have an issue around that. So my next question related to that, just to cover this one for me, because I tend to agree with Councillor Morrison on this one. I think that I would be more in favor of moving to the proposed option. But I will turn to our Michael, if you wouldn't mind, why you think we should be going to the semi-urban approach,
Sure.
given that response.
Can I speak from here?
Yes.
Is that okay? All right.
Michael?
Through you, Chair. So ultimately, you know, complete streets between the two road standards, the semi-urban and urban, they still provide pedestrian connectivity. There's still sufficient vehicular width for cars to pass. So they both function the same way. In terms of stormwater, I think the pond, you know, ultimately we're controlling the same amount of water, whether it's through a sewer system or through ditch conveyance. It's going to be, you know, the same amount of water that's being released further downstream. We could make it work that it's pre to post. That's our target all the time. That's the goal. We don't want any more water being released that wasn't being released before. So there's various methods of doing that, various methods of quality control. The quality control that's being used in the ditch, that can be substituted for upsized oil grit separator in front of the pond. There's already one being proposed already, so it'd just be a matter of upsizing it. Another thing with open ditches is, you know, the sort of the upfront cost is a little bit less, but over time, the maintenance cost for the town, in my opinion, is you know, is bigger. So road edges tend to fall apart. You don't have that containment with that the curb provides. So you have a little bit of, you know, maintenance, more maintenance that's required there. And once you start patching the edges of the road, it's not a, you know, that's a Band-Aid. You'd have to redo the whole road to get that full structure back. Open ditches also are prone to getting silt in there. So sure, they provide quality right now, but 10 years from now, we'll probably have to be in there ditching it or cleaning it and making sure that the quality is in fact still being managed properly. Yeah, there are various reasons. Overall, I think if you put in a urban section, you have a more robust road that tends to last longer. There's more space as well in the boulevard for, you know, we don't have a bus network that runs through there now, but 10 years from now, if we were to put a stop in there, like a bus stop or something like that, or benches, we'd have space to do that, right? So.
And again, I really appreciate that answer because it does kind of put it in perspective. I agree with the proposal that there are a number of reasons, including the environment, why we might do the ditches. But if we do go with that approach, that in the long term, it's probably more of a cost to the municipality in the long run. So that is a decision for us. But I do appreciate both answers. And one more thing, and then you can kick it, or do you want to kick
I
it?
know Richard has a comment about
Okay,
this.
and then
so-
I'll
so
hold
let me go
off
to
on my
Richard and
other
I'll come back.
comments. Okay.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So just, I mean, what Michael said is, to me, that's the biggest thing. But just to speak on the environmental side of things. So we do see a lot of municipalities in Southern Ontario looking at their neighborhoods and trying to retrofit subdivision neighborhoods to make them more environmentally friendly. And one of the things they can do is look at the roads that were developed in those cul-de-sacs, and they can take out the curbs to encourage these swales, low impact development techniques, which would encourage infiltration of water into the ground. So less stormwater overall. These swales can often be planted so that there's evapotranspiration happening when those plants take up the moisture and then release it back into the air. However, Huntsville and Muskoka is very different. This development is on rock. So the infiltration rate that would be occurring is very different than what would be happening in parts of the province south of us. These are the amount of salt we put on the roads that gets pushed into those ditches would seriously hamper the ability of vegetation to grow, to provide that evapotranspiration. So what we're suggesting is just we stick with the development standard. The development standard that we have in the town of Huntsville is for, in the urban area, to have an urban section. That's all we're suggesting. What we saw in our review of the plans was that the proposal was to not build in accordance with the town's development standards. And we asked, what's the reason? The reason we got back was just that other developments, other roads have been built to that standard. And from our perspective, given council's objectives to move away from what has been done in the past, we tried to impose a condition to make sure that this future road would be more in keeping with what we want to achieve.
Thanks. Do you have another comment?
I do, but I can go to others because but really what I wanted to do was on one of the other issues, I echo Councillor Morrison's comments about the height. I agree with you. I think that is something that we certainly could respond favorably to.
Okay. I'm going to go to Councillor Cloutier.
Through you, Chair. A couple things. When we're talking about density in areas, I mean, we just approved apartment building in the West End, and we got criticized because we were taking high density, putting it in low density old neighborhoods. If we do this up there, we're taking away that problem. We're putting high density in one area, Yes, it's higher than normal in our areas, but at least it's all combined in one area. People that are moving in there realize what they're moving into, where they're moving into it. So I don't really have a problem with it. Different developers, I think, because we're going to have different developers, it's a pretty big project for one to handle. But if we have all the right rules right off the start that covers the whole area, not just each separate lot, we're ahead of the game there. This whole land up there has been classified as a subdivision, I think, for over 30 years, and it sat there dormant. It's nice to finally see something getting done with it. And as far as the roads go, I mean, if you look at it, we put in 800 meters of road, sidewalks on both sides. That's 1,600 meters that we have to maintain, plow. And right now, we're stretched to the limit right now with our staff now doing it. Plus, we have other sidewalks coming on board in the near future here. And where was it? Yeah, like as far as the ditches, as Michael saying, you know, maintain them. The subdivision in behind my house, probably 40 years old. I don't know how long it is, but it's an older. I've been there for 24 years. I have yet to see them clean the ditches out. So that's 24 years. It's an older designed subdivision. I don't see any water laying in the ditches or anything. Everything flows through there pretty good, and the whole bit. So I don't have a big problem with that. Just because we can, like, I know you were saying, Richard, that, you know, there's rock, water does seep into rock. It's hard to think in your head that it doesn't, but it does. That's how you get cracks in rock. Water gets into rock and it will filter away. There's lots of natural constraints in that area, in the lowlands areas, for the water to filter itself out and for the amount of area that's there. I see it, and even with the ditches, like we won't have as many entrance ways going into these buildings and stuff like this. So I don't really have a problem with what's put forward.
Councillor Clark?
Thanks, Chair Stone. So just want to have a couple comments about the ditching, because that seems to be what we're stuck on right now. I'll be honest, I'm a little hesitant about ditching in new developments. I mean, we do have older developments that have been done that do have ditches, and anybody that's been in Huntsville knows that some of those areas have issues because of ditches right now. And I kind of lean towards that. I think that new development should have proper curbs, gutters, and sidewalks. And I think if you're talking to today's buyers that are going to be coming up here and looking at this development to buy, I think you're going to see that most buyers would expect that in a new development and subdivision. And I can tell you, as the Chaffee Ward councillor, that I receive a lot of phone calls from areas, neighbors that have live in older areas with ditches that are constantly saying, when are you going to put sidewalks, curbs, gutters? We've got issues with our ditches. Those are older areas that wish they had all those things. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't want to put us in a position where we're not doing that today, and then 15 years from now all the neighbors are wanting it and we're having issues anyway as far as maintenance. So just some thoughts on that from me.
Deputy Mayor Armour?
Thanks, Chair Stone. In fear of repeating everything over and over again, I think Richard talked about development standards, and I think that development standards, we're talking about curbs and gutters, et cetera. So I'm okay with that. I think that fits well in that development where you're going to build and the clientele you're going to want to sell those places to. When I talk about the height, I think we should be following our bylaw. If it says from the road line, we should be following the road line, then I think that's fine. You know, we want development standards on this side. We want our bylaw on this side, so we should follow both. For me, the other one is Shea Road, and the Shea Road looks fine to me. It looks to me like it needs some cleaning down on the shoulder side, take the grass out of there, put some new gravel in there, and I think that road would be more than sufficient. So that's where I'm standing on this, so let's go.
Can somebody tell me who owns Shea Road? CAO
Thank you,
Corey?
Mr. Chairman. So it's actually the Ministry of Transportation, that the province that owns it. So we've been having ongoing discussions about assuming ownership of that road. It's a very lengthy process. So we do have a temporary agreement with them that will allow us to have use of that road until such time as the transfer can take place. But we do not own the road.
Personally, I don't think the development should be held up because of what's going on with the road. We'll get to the right answer eventually, and who owns it, who maintains it. Richard, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just a comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair, on Shea Road. So the condition, I'm not sure I understand why it's causing a concern. We did go out on site, myself and Michael, and met with the engineer for this development, and we looked at that road. And the condition is just to ensure, what we agreed on is that it needed to be a secondary access to the development that provides year-round emergency access. So under the building code, in order for it to be a emergency access, it has to be 6 meters wide. So one of the things we need to confirm is that it is 6 meters wide across its entire length. So this assessment that we're talking about would answer that question. As we met on site, we also looked at the shoulders. The shoulders did not appear to provide a safe pull-off width in certain locations. So we agreed that that should be looked at, and where possible, safe pull-off shoulders would be added. So these were all things that we met about, and as a result of that, we kept that condition in because it would require that assessment to occur. So I'm not sure why it's causing a problem, but that's the intent.
All right.
Perhaps just to clarify, so we have gone out and measured, and it's a 7 meter wide paved width. We believe it's like that in its entirety. The reason why there's some hesitation on our end is related to the wording of the condition, which, I mean, if my old boss used to say, if so-and-so gets hit by a bus tomorrow and someone new is administering the condition, what exactly does secondary access mean? We've been out there, we've evaluated, we think the road is in great condition, it's sufficiently wide to meet OBC requirements, and the OBC requirement, which is the 6 meters, includes space to maneuver around vehicles. So, the shoulder in our view is kind of an added benefit over and above that. So it's really a clarification on our end. We don't know when the second phase is going to come along. It might take a bit longer. So really just trying to nail that down now. And based on what we've seen, we don't believe any additional improvements are required. So we'd like to take that out now. That's the preference.
All right, thank you. And like I said, I don't want that to hold up this development. Personally, regarding the height, I'm happy with our bylaw standards and how they operate, so that's perfectly fine with me. And I'll be with you in a minute. And I'm not sure how I feel about the curbs. The one thing that really wasn't mentioned with maintenance of the ditching is the replacement of the culverts. That could be very expensive if it's paved over in order to get to these developments and the culverts need to be replaced. I know that's on us. So I'm still not sure how I feel about that. I'm going to go to Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and I appreciate both presentations from the applicant and from planning, and the comments made around the table, some very insightful and thoughtful comments. As to your last comment, the cost breakdown, I would love to see an analysis of that, because I don't know how you determine that. What's more expensive? The infrastructure you have to replace every 20 years, or if there's a failure. It seems to me it would be cheaper to work above ground than below ground with minimal materials required. We talk about urban roads and sidewalks. Well, we don't allow bikes or scooters on sidewalks, and this is phased in. So how many people are going to be walking there over 20 years? Are they going to be on their scooters, their bikes, running with their strollers, whatever? So I think modes of transportation are changing every day. My daughter rides her hoverboard around in Port Sydney. So does it really apply, and is it going to be an immediate thing that we need to deal with now with this phased-in process? I don't know if we need to rethink it a little bit. So I tend to support the applicant's requests at this point.
Councillor Renwick.
Thank you, Chair Stone. I guess my question, I'm not an engineer, but if we were to not put the sidewalks and the curbs in at this point, and we were to do it later on, is that something that's possible, or is it just easier to do it now and then? But if we just let the culverts be there and then later on put the sidewalks in, is that something that we could do, or is that just not a good engineering practice?
Is that a question we want answered? Claude?
Well, can I,
Claude's going to speak to this.
Good afternoon, everybody. And thanks to the chair and the mayor for organizing this special meeting. It's much appreciated. I just want to take you back to what we recently completed on Shea Road as part of the commercial development. So I think and the town public works department came up with this idea, and I think it's a great way to deal with accessibility. So what we did there, the lanes are 4.5 meters wide because of truck traffic. So they're an extra meter wider. And so, but what we're then going to do on their second lift of asphalt, which goes down this year because we've experienced 2 winters to make sure there's been no distortion, we're going to pave another 1.5 meters of width, which will be the multi-purpose trail. It's going to have 4 feet of gravel under it because it's part of the road construction. If you build a sidewalk on the other side of a ditch, it has 6 inches of gravel under it, typically. That's the spec. And it breaks up like crazy in our climate. So there will be a little rumble strip that will separate it, which is just, makes that little bit of a noise. We'll separate a 1.5 meter multi-purpose trail, sidewalk, call it what you will, that doesn't have the problems that people in wheelchairs suffer from the joints in the concrete sidewalks. That problem doesn't exist, and it lasts incredibly well because of the base that we're putting under it. And now it's 450 of granulars plus the A on top, so really well built. And the plow can drop its wing and plow it on the way by. So another economy of scale there. So we think that approach for the rest of that street that Fairvern's on, Paisley Avenue, we think that's the ultimate. And when the town takes over Old Shea Road and goes to improve it, I can guarantee you're not going to spend the extra $1.5 million to try and do an enclosed storm system. You'll have open ditches on either side, which it's been since it was the colonization road to North Bay, the old part of it. And so Center Street was built with open swales, works well. All of Commerce Park, all of that area works well. The 2 subdivisions just before that I did in a previous life, those have to be enclosed with the sidewalk and everything, because you can't leave that part of the road allowance as an open swale because it's virtually a third of the front yard of the houses. That doesn't work. So in those residential sections, you've got to go with an enclosed storm system. But here, where those buildings probably will be 50 feet back from the street we're going to build in a very naturalized setting, it just doesn't, from our standpoint, we think it's environmentally better, and the capital asset management concerns for the town are better. We've run the numbers, and let's face it, there's hundreds of kilometers of ditches in Huntsville that never get, they work quite well. So, in that whole context of that whole part of town, this is probably the last road that's going to be built. That's it. Everything's going to be north of 60 or whatever. And you're not going to do an enclosed storm system on Old Shea to get there. So what are we talking about? Thank you.
Thanks for all that. That's good. Councillor Morrison.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Stone. I appreciate all the feedback. Like, I don't want to sound hypocritical because I say let's stick to the current bylaw for the height, and then I go against the bylaw maybe on the plan for the urban street design. But what I do like is Richard has set us up so that no matter who develops the land going forward, it has to go through CPP. We're going to have strict regulations on all of that. But to get there, I think we're trying to lay out the groundwork. Shea Road, I agree. I went up. If you guys get a chance to check it out, I went up and checked it out. There's not even much room to the sides because there's water course on both sides. So I don't know if there's any requests for sidewalks along there, but I don't think we would ever want to do that. But there's actually a really amazing path, and I think you guys built that. And there's a path going from next to Fairburn all the way through to get up to Freshco. Everything else, it's really good with culverts and everything else. So I think they're already taking steps to connect trails and everything else, which I like. I was going to ask the question about the plowing, and maybe if somebody could verify that, because I thought the savings, if they can just put the plow down as opposed to doing a sidewalk plow, because we're already at our max with Tina and her crew. I think there's a benefit to that. And I do know that when we do have sidewalk failures, we have to outsource that. You know, we can't even do it in-house, where if it's a paved thing, we can handle it. So I do tend to see savings. I don't want to go against the bylaw, because all Richard is doing is sticking to the bylaw. He's doing his job. But I wonder if maybe, like Councillor Fitzgerald said, maybe we do have to relook at this. And in certain situations, we look at changes. To Councillor Clark's comment of 20 years down the road experience problems, what if 20 years down the road all municipalities are doing what's going on down south, and we look at the better option being to rip out the curb and gutter, you know? So got to think forward to what's coming, and if that's what's coming, I'd like to be ahead of the curve. Just my thoughts.
Mayor Alcock.
Okay, I think this is my final comment, my final answer. I'm following Councillor Morrison, and I tend to agree with everything that you just said. And because of this conversation, I flip back and forth on the curbs, but actually, Claude, your representation around the thought that went into that, and the reference to the plowing of the laneways, because in fact we know we have other pathways and sidewalks that we don't plow in the winter because it's too expensive or whatever. So this allows for year-round access for people that are on bikes and all of the other, as was referenced earlier, it's multimodal and it would be all year round. So I really like that. And, you know, I don't need to go into the height again, because I think we are sticking to the bylaw there, and that makes sense. In essence, because of all of this discussion, I think that each of the three requests I'm certainly supportive of. But last thing I want to say, and it goes back to where you started, Richard, you've put a lot of really good conditions in here. There's a 30% requirement for preservation of the landscaping and tree preservation. And when we talk about issues around height, well, that's also because of a lot of tree removal. And this is, you've done a great job at saying, we don't want to do that here. So you've addressed that. And I think that that goes a long way to speaking to the other. I know, I'm using your words right back at you. It's your fault. Anyway, so that's where I'm landing.
All right, thank you. Deputy Mayor Armour.
Thanks, Chair Stone. I'm still a little stuck on the ditches aspect, because my concern is, 3 years down the road when they wash out and we need new catch basins and stuff like that. That's going to be on the town dime. We're doing that. And also, where's the buffer or the room to put in street lights or trees along through there if we're going down with big swells and ditches and et cetera? How are you going to get to a bus? Yes, like I think that's where I'm stuck on that, because it is right in an urban area, and there's going to be a lot of foot traffic through that area. So,
All right, I'll go to the applicant.
Sure. In terms of lighting and street trees, you're right that you're looking at a different type of landscaping in the ditch than street trees. And part of that is because, as Claude mentioned, you're going to have a very large setback from the buildings to the street that are going to be treed yards. We intentionally put in larger front yard setback of 10 meters into the bylaw. So 30 feet of landscaping and potentially in front of the building from the tree back. And we can design the ditches with species that are salt tolerant, that provide additional quality control measures. So you're right that you won't have the same level of street trees perhaps as an urban section, but you're going to have a more functional ecosystem, environmental system that supplements the trees that are also being retained on the blocks around them. And in terms of kind of the bus stops, one of the benefits here, there was a question about culverts. There's really only going to be one driveway per block is what's envisioned here. So we're talking 6 entrances, 6 culverts. So it's a really good, long, uninterrupted ditch system with just a few culverts and an ability to design those entrances so that they include additional space, potentially for bus stops or things like that. So although the system, the cross section shows, ditch on both sides, there is an ability to include additional space for bus stops and also to incorporate streetlights and things in there, because there also is still space for the utility ducts underground and everything like that. So it's still a 20-meter right-of-way. There's still plenty of space to incorporate some of those additional measures as well. It's just kind of being done in a different format.
Richard?
I'm sorry to belabor this point, but I do feel it is important to say and to remind council is that Huntsville is growing, and we are seeing a lot of development. We're seeing a lot of changes. We have these development standards in place to make sure that as we grow, as we change, we're going to be creating the type of municipality that will require less maintenance, less ditching, all of the things that are in place and we have to do because of the way some of our roads were built in the past. We now have new development standards to make sure that we're addressing those things. The one other thing maybe you could go to Michael on is some of the developments like Muskoka Commerce Park, they did have to spend substantial amounts of money to do ditching there. So these are the kind of things that you have to consider when you're a growing municipality. So we're just in the planning department trying to make sure that that gets done.
I appreciate that. Thank you. The applicant quickly.
Sorry, just our civil engineer would just maybe like to speak to the standard point of view. This is Tim from Pinestone Engineering.
Thank you, through the chair. I want to make one comment with regard to the standards. The town of Huntsville has multiple standards for road cross sections. They include the urban standard that's being recommended by staff, as well as a 20-meter semi-urban section, as well as a 26-meter semi-urban section. So it's really just a matter of which section you have is most applicable. And so the thinking in this area, where every surrounding street is a semi-urban section, would be most applicable.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and through you. It's hard because none of us around the table have the math, right? I think Richard makes some excellent points. It's hard not to listen to them, and then the applicant makes some really good points. It's hard not to listen, and the engineer makes some really good points. It's hard for me to sit here and say what's going to be more cost effective. But I know that the Walmart and Center Street have been there for a lot of years, and I don't remember seeing something that come across this table for a massive budget variance or anything to take care of them. And I do think there are other cost savings that might make up for it. But I think if you look at the bus stop even, the thing to remember is the first stretch of Paisley is going to be full curb and gutter, right? It's going to be, so if you're going to have a bus stop, that's where you can have it, right? So I don't think the bus stop is an issue. And if we have to add it somewhere further down, like they mentioned, then we'll find a way because we own that right of way. And then when you think of the fact that this doesn't really connect, it's not a long road through many subdivisions. It's Center to Shea, and that's it. So it's not impacting other areas where you're like, oh, they got a sidewalk, we don't. It won't be like that. And from the real estate side, Councillor Clark and I will tell you, people bring up stuff like, why don't I have it? Well, they're going to know when they move in 2020, whatever, this is it. It's more of an urban natural subdivision, right? With big setbacks, lots of trees. It's not going to be unheard of to see no sidewalk there. They might rather see a place where you can hop on your bike, hop on your scooter and go through town. So I think we need to look at long-term, what is the best plan going forward? But for this subdivision, it just seems to make a bit of sense for me.
All right, last question, go ahead.
Don't sound so excited, sir. I still go back to, we do not have the staff, the resources to plow, and I wish Tina was here, to plow another 1,600 meters of sidewalk that, plus we're getting stuff already in the queue for more sidewalks. I think we can ask all of us around here about our staffing where we can't afford to hire more staff. And this way here is when it's being plowed, it's plowed off. As far as the bus stop, if we ask the applicant on one of the entrances that into one of the buildings down further towards Shea Road, you make it a little wider, you put your bus stop there now in your development, which isn't a big deal. It's a little bit longer culvert and landscaping or whatever for the future. I mean, you could go ahead and put whatever you want there. But if we do that now, we have the bus stop there. We have the bus stop up at Fairburn. I don't think that's a big issue, the bus stop thing, but you know, everybody'd love to see sidewalks everywhere. This isn't Kitchener. This is Huntsville.
Thank you. All right, given the conversation, I will entertain an amendment or I will read the resolution. Councillor Morrison.
I would motion an amendment to do the red line items that the applicant had proposed.
All right, so do we have something prepared? No, we don't. All right. All right. Do you have a seconder?
Do you want to give Tricia a recess so we
Okay.
can prepare it?
We're going to take a 10-minute recess. All right. I'm not going to read the original motion, which is very lengthy in the, you can read it in the agenda, but I have a proposed amendment. So what is this?
That's the amendment.
That's not everything.
It's a, item number 1 about the height. So they asked for that.
Sorry, just 1 second.
Ask for the building height be removed. So that's what the amendment is. We are removing item 1.
All right. So I have a motion to amend, moved by Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. Be it resolved that item 1 under exception BBBB be struck out. And are there comments or questions? So, Mayor Alcock.
Just, thank you, Chair Stone. Just one last comment about the proposal with respect to the complete streets. I'm back to it for a minute. So, and I know that that's being, we're proposing to go with the applicant's request. So what's being proposed is this wide strip that is multimodal, that is attached to the road, separated by a rumble strip, and it's wide. But that's where we are expecting walkers as well as cyclists, as any, or scooter people and scooters, all to use that one strip. So I just, there are going to be a lot of people in this, on this street. And I'm just trying to think of another example where we have all three using that multimodal path. And do walkers, you know, if walkers feel as comfortable, if you're a senior, not necessarily steady on your feet, are you comfortable on that? And I'm just wondering, perhaps, is that, Richard, if I go back to you, is that one of your comments about this?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. That's a great question, Madam Mayor. Well, to be honest, we were not aware that that's what was being proposed until this meeting. We thought what was being proposed was the semi-urban section that's in our development standards as opposed to the urban section. The semi-urban section includes a road, a ditch, and then a sidewalk. We were not told until just now that what was being proposed was less than that, and that it was going to be road with a rumble strip and then a multi-use sidewalk. That's part of the road. It was never presented to us, so can't really comment on that. It would have not been supported by staff. I'm sure operations would have had some comments about that. That's not what we would encourage be approved in this instance.
Thank you for that. And
Go ahead.
well, I'm just, for me, I would like to hear the applicant's response on that because of how that works elsewhere. Because I do, you know, again, I have an electric bike. I think having that multimodal strip perfect, because I don't want to use it on a sidewalk and I don't feel comfortable on the road. So it's perfect for me. But if I'm a senior having to use that same, and we're right down the street from seniors, a lot of them, asking them to walk on that same path that people on e-bikes and other things, I'm not sure how comfortable I am with that.
No,
go
no,
to the
fair
applicant.
point.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Mayor, and I just want to clarify that the semi-urban section could also include the sidewalk instead, if that was the direction and the preference of the town. The thinking was, though, that the new Shea Road was built with that configuration. And so there had been some, thinking on the applicant's end of the benefits of that in terms of the quality of the construction with the gravel, the granular base that's much thicker than the sidewalk, the synergies in terms of the plowing and the ability to accommodate the additional forms of transportation. But if the preference of the town was to go with the sidewalk, that could also be accommodated in the suburban, or could be accommodated instead in the semi-urban section.
Councillor Cloutier first.
I understand your concerns, and this is new, and maybe we should do it, but I mean, go in any subdivision in this town of Huntsville, and they're not sidewalks. Everybody shares it, even just on a normal road width in a street. The bicycles, the walkers, kids playing hockey, everybody's on the same width. I understand where the bike lanes and the pedestrians, but I mean, this is in a normal subdivision setting that we have and a lot of. It's just everybody on a normal roadway, whereas here they're being offered another 1.5 meters for that traffic to be on, and 1.5 meters is pretty sufficient. And I don't see a problem with it. And
Councillor Morrison.
again, I go back to the maintenance again.
Yeah, I think I share Mayor Alcock's concern, but then I think because it's only an 800-meter stretch and it's flat, I don't think the speeds of the bikes will get up to a point where it could cause some serious concern. And if the sight lines are straight, if I'm going on my bike and I see someone I'm going to go around, or if I'm watching as a walker, because you're supposed to be going in opposite directions as walkers and bikers, both parties would be able to avoid each other. But I do wonder your comment about having the sidewalk, but still doing the ditching. I want to know, is that something that the applicant would be willing to do? And if so, is it something the town wants? Like, not only to now have the shoulder, but now we're also taking on the inventory of additional stuff. So,
Deputy Mayor Armour.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Stone. Just to follow along with Mayor Alcock there, if you think about Howland Drive or Center Street, that's exactly how it's set up. And those are high pedestrian areas. So this is only really 1 block away. It's going to be a high pedestrian area. So I would feel better with a ditch and then a sidewalk than actually having people go down the side of the road. So just my opinion on that one.
Claude?
Thank you. There's the concept of the 1.5 meter wide multi-purpose facility doesn't mean that motorized vehicles necessarily have to use that. The street is still wide open for use. And we had the same thing on Haynes Road before we added more lanes. We had the rumble strip, and we had a paved strip behind that. So we're just expanding that to a wider one than used to exist on Haynes Road. And it worked out quite well. There wasn't a conflict between pedestrians and e-bikes or whatever. There's going to be tons of asphalt, tons of room for everybody. And I think they can cohabitate quite nicely, frankly. But if part of the advantage of this is that it's got a big granular base under it, as opposed to a isolated sidewalk that doesn't, that is concrete and much harder to maintain. And a little bit of signage, and we'll do a bump out halfway along that distance that could be a future bus stop. So it'll be there and ready to go when that time might come to. So I think that, and the ability not to have to send a separate piece of equipment to keep it clear of snow in the winter, I think all of those things bode well. And And, 10 years from now, you might look at that and say, that worked really well and we want to do more. Or, you know what? Somebody's come up with a better idea. But for that distance, and the seniors won't be leaving the building, if you know what I mean. I've checked it out.
Okay.
There is a large number
appreciate it.
of
Thank you.
homes going in here. However, it is an internal road. It's not a through road. It's just the people living there that are going to be using it. It's not.
Yep.
Not a.
No, I agree.
Townhomes?
I and appreciate the response. Thank you.
All right. Deputy Mayor Armour.
So, sorry about this. I just want the ownership. So how much are we actually going to own? So just the ditch, and then after that, that's going to belong to the blocks, or is there any room for us later on as a town, if we find it to be a health and safety issue going down the side of the road, that we wanted to put in a pedestrian path down that side?
I'll go to Richard for that.
So it would be a 20-meter right-of-way. So that's all we would be taking ownership of. And we couldn't add to it afterwards.
The only thing I'll just quickly add is I want to remind that the revision we're asking council to look at is just to remove the requirement for the urban section, which provides flexibility so we can come up with the best design here. And if there's kind of a direction to look at that cross section in more detail, we can do that and we can refine the semi-urban cross section. The idea though is that as I think Claude mentioned earlier, in a traditional subdivision, people kind of make use of the boulevard as their lawn. That's not really required here because you're going to have these big setbacks and these trees and everything. So it's a bit of a unique context. I think it was Councillor Morrison who coined the term environmental urban development or something along those lines. And I think it's a really, natural urban. It's a really kind of unique format that we're really trying to kind of get to here.
Just to one other point, if later on you want to put a sidewalk down, you just put it on the other side of the road. The road allowance would be wide enough for it.
All right. So the amendment before us is to strike out the defined building height. That's what we're you guys were way off base. All right. So that's what before us right now. So to remove item 1 under exception BBB to be struck out. Any final comments or questions? Then I'll call the question. All in favor? And that carries. And the main motion as amended, all in favor? And that carries. Sign both. All right. So, do I have to read that? All right. So I have another amendment moved by Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. Be it resolved that the following be added to the end of the first paragraph with the following amendments. Delete condition 5. Replace condition 4 with the following. Prior to final approval being granted, the road allowance included in this plan of subdivision shall be dedicated as a public highway, and a road shall be designed and constructed as a complete street in accordance with applicable development standards, with provision for active transportation lanes and street tree protection where feasible, and named all to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville. Councillor Morrison?
And to Trish, that's the one where we just remove the 3 words urban. Okay.
Okay, everybody understands what we're voting on? Comments or questions? All in favor? And that carries. And now the main motion as amended. All in favor? And that carries as well. made motions? It's all very confusing. Okay. I know this one. Moved by Councillor Morris and seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. Be it resolved that confirmation bylaw 2025-61 be received and passed this 28th day of May, 2025. All in favor? One more. Moved by Councillor Renwick, seconded by Councillor Kuche. Be it resolved that we do now hereby adjourn at 2:48 p.m. All in favor? And that one carries for sure. Thank you, everyone. Good discussion.